My name is Francesca Zwang, and I was previously the Collections Care Fellow and currently the Collections and Exhibitions Assistant here at the Fabric Workshop and Museum. This is another episode of Unpacking Our Stories. Currently, I'm standing in front of Jiha Moon's Springfield 1 mixed media painting here on our first floor galleries. This painting was created during Jiha Moon's 2010 residency, and today we are going to be unpacking her story. The conversation is going to include multiple perspectives from Jiha Moon herself, past project coordinator Jen McTague, and lastly, Lauren Haynes, who is currently the Senior Curator of Contemporary Art at the Nasher Museum of Art at Duke University. Please join us in unpacking our stories.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak and reflect on Jiha Moon's project. And thank you so much, Francesca, and to the Fabric Workshop and Museum. I'm really excited to revisit this project that I really love so dearly and care a lot about. So what I'm going to do today is share some of the images from the process of putting it together, putting the project together with Jiha, because there was a lot of collaboration and back and forth that I think would be really interesting to go through. My background is printmaking, screen printing primarily, and really screen printing on paper is my initial background. But being at the Fabric Workshop, had to really immerse myself in becoming an expert of everything. Okay, so this is one of my all-time favorite photos of me and Jiha. And I think why I love it so much is it really speaks to how compatible we were with working together. Jiha has a really great sense of humor and is really fun and playful in the studio. And I love to bring that kind of spirit and energy in the studio as well. This box, this is a photograph of one of the boxes of Jiha's project that kind of really shows how visually interesting and colorful and playful this project really was. And I pulled out aside the Botan rice candy because that was kind of like a starting point with the Botan garden piece. Let's see here. This Botan garden painting, which is on Hanji paper, and it's a really very detailed painting that's made in lots of layers, almost in the way that printmakers break apart layers. You can kind of see that in the way that Jiha composes these paintings. But there's also really fun elements like the embroidered peony that was from purchased in Korea from one of Jiha's trips there, or might have even been from one of your family members that mailed it back to you to be incorporated into your project. But you can see the cute little Botan candy kitty cat made their way into this work. So one of the things that I love that Jiha does in her work is you can see you have the pink peony, the traditional peony that's like a symbol of like wealth and status and peace. And Jiha gets really playful and kind of makes these blue peonies, kind of flipping the script a little bit and kind of making her own language. Okay, so what we ended up doing in the very beginning with this project is starting with a multiple. So we turned this painting into a scarf that had this really special hanging component. with like the rainbow, like a traditional Korean rainbow silk. And this was printed on silk charmeuse, and it came in 2 different sizes actually. And so this was the very first thing that we did together, and it kind of warmed us up. Jiha was living in Atlanta, Georgia, and of course we were in Philadelphia. So a lot of our project happened over the phone, happened over email, happened via FedEx packages. And so we had to find a really great way to communicate back and forth. Once the project really started to take shape, there was going to be an exhibition coming up, New American Voices. And once we kind of started to play around with what the actual project could be, that's where a lot of the fun really started to happen. So we started with organza, silk organza, and trying to figure out how we can play with those ideas of transparency, layers, collage. And these were some of the earliest samples of me just mailing Jiha some pieces of silk organza and say, play around, what can you do? And figuring out like how the paint would sit on it. Was Jiha able to collage the hanji paper onto it? What was the opacity like? So we were kind of doing these samples independently in the FWM studio and then in Jiha's studio to start to make it come together. And then we would come together in these really big whirlwind of a trip, and we would just dive right in and try to get as much work as possible done. And
so funny to see that picture. I just had a baby at that time. I was like, it was so much struggle trying to get the timing right to come visit. And I just like earlier on, I texted Jen, like, do you remember when that was? So it's like 2010. The exhibition actually happened in 2011. And I just remember when I was pregnant, I was afraid to tell the museum that I was pregnant because I was afraid that they trust me enough to push through this project. And I actually told Kippy at that time, and she was really generous. And she was like, you know, there's other women artists who've done project terrifically here. So don't fear, just tell us what you need. And I remember my second trip, I had to coordinate to bring one of my best friends to watch my son, who is now 13. But he was just start walking, getting into everything. And while my friend is watching my son, I was at the workshop working my butt off. And the museum closed at 5 or 6. And I had to bring everything to the artist's apartment because I couldn't, like 6 in the evening is really early time. I could work a lot more because I'm here. What am I gonna do? So like move everything to the artist studio and then apartment and then work at night there too. So almost like the time kind of stops and just like constantly working all day long and then struggling with the babies, and trip kind of like coordinated that way. And Jen, I remember you had to get the car seat for baby too. So that was quite a lot of juggling, lots of women working there as an artist and staff, and everybody trying to make stuff happen. And so it's such a fond memory for me. And I think that was a fuel. I remember how easy now that I can communicate with my son. He's a teenager, but that was a really difficult time. And I'm thinking about it, quite proud what I have done. And, a lot of people really helped me to get stuff done.
Absolutely. And we were all just so excited to finally have you in the studio and working and, making it as easy for you as possible. At the time I wasn't a mother, but I am a mother now, and kind of reflecting on all the hurdles that you had to jump through just to push through and have this really intensive time in the studio. I definitely value and appreciate it so much more. Really quite inspiring, all that we did. I do have a few, I don't know why those other photos didn't load, but I'll see if I can get them back. But I think I do have some photos of you in the apartment as well.
Yeah, this image, you know, it's quite interesting because my work, at that time I was really struggling with my story being too obvious. And I wanted to sort of borrow the form of abstraction, and abstraction also liberates, like, when I'm in my studio working around the images, like, you know, I'm really getting to my process and sort of follow the mark makings. And I wanted to sort of utilize that more to make artwork. And a lot of mark makings and layering is happening all on one surfaces as a painting wise. And often time people kind of dismiss and they see what they like to see, and then they just kind of like pass. I mean, that's how the, you know, the nature of artwork is. But I wanted to see if there's other way that I can sort of value. So the organza is really similar to Hanji. It's like sheer, you can kind of see the previous layer, but then I wanted to separate all the layers and then put them together, almost like a printmaking sort of like, you know, technique as you work on a mylar surfaces, like, you know, you can see the previous layers. And organza was really great for that. And I remember at the workshop, everybody was encouraging, like, you know, we are here to troubleshoot for you. So whatever you want to do, just use your imagination and just like tell us what you want and we'll find a way to make it happen. So like, you know, embroidery, mark makings, machine, also hand embroidery, mark makings, screen print. And also I myself sort of inserted my mark making there. So it's kind of separate sheets and then put them all together. It creates really fantastical depth that I could kind of see it. I was really excited about that. So, and this piece, I guess, like it's really a lot influenced even now that how can I say, the abstraction of it, like, you know, but my story is still there, but it's through the abstract language, everything sort of come together. And as early on, we talk about Springfield as like one of the very popular American suburb, the town name. And I was thinking about the Simpsons, you know, Simpsons, like, you know, it's almost like a sort of purgatory, utopian, kind of funky, funny, in a way that represent America. Like there's, you know, people like me exist too, like living in a Springfield. And I think this was kind of starting point of showing a lot more abstracted mark makings as an artist.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think that's what ended up, you know, happening. And, you know, there were so many iterations and testing that happened. You know, I'm kind of showing only the things that really made it past the, you know, chopping block. But this piece here, this photograph here is the initial start of it without any of your painting. So it has the two layers of the silk organza kind of lined up. And then it has hand embroidery on it. And then the peonies, the blue peonies were machine embroidered. And I don't know if you remember, but we really had such a hard time like finding somebody who could work with the organza to do a quality digital embroidery. And we went through so many stages to find the right person to be able to do that and have that machinery. But once we found it, we were able to get it to work, and then also doing lots of the hand embroidery. So here you can see kind of those peony embroideries up close, and then also some of the just hand embroidery on some of like the leaves or the branches that are kind of being depicted. That's kind of a fuzzy photo, but you get the point. And so then
I remember, I think that the blue peony part is hand embroidered, right? Like you told me about this person who has MFA in the, you know, embroidered. That's like, I was looking at it almost like a jewel. Like, oh my God, this is so incredible.
The blue peonies are machine embroidered, but then they had French knots hand embroidered on top. And then all of the line work was hand embroidered. Yeah. And we definitely had lots of help in the studio with that hand embroidery. And then here, this is kind of, so then we have all of this, then we send it to you. So you would take this back to your studio in Atlanta and then do all of the painting and the collaging on top of it with like these great little Pac-Man with like kind of like shark teeth. And to me, they're always like smiling, like a little devilish smile. But, kind of looking at it, working together, figuring out how to stretch it in the right way. And even figuring out like what that spacing is between the two layers. And I remember there was a lot of back and forth with there was a
back and forth conversation. Yeah, I remember that was kind of one of the most difficult thing for me working with the fabric workshop and museum, because like you work in the moment. And for me, that's so important. Even if it's like 20 minutes, I have a full focus on working and I have the momentum of working. And it was like just really stretched for a long time with fabric workshop and museum. And next time when we see, like, let me see what we have, where have we stopped? And we have to kind of rewind and go back to find that spot. And I have to get re-excited again. So that was kind of difficult. It like overall, it took several years, right? And then I did site visit like 3 times or 4 times. I can't remember, but like I remember went several times.
Once you and I started working, it was about a year and a half from that silk scarf, that Botan silk scarf, to the exhibition. So once we really figured out kind of like how we were going to approach it, then we were able to really get the ball rolling. But there was definitely like a lot of lead up to it. So some of these photos here, so there were 10 works total that you created. 3 of them were kind of the Springfield series, very traditionally framed, 1/4-inch spacing between them, like, Ursula Hobson framed them and they were really gorgeous. But then there were the 2 blankets that had all of the special like additional framing, including your mother's wedding dress, which is in this photograph here. And then there were 2 rainbow paintings and collages with the unusual stretcher bar, and then Ever Emerging, which was its own unique kind of really flowy silk organza piece.
Yeah.
But this is the moment. This is when we cut apart your mother's wedding dress. And kind of put together that border, collaging the different rainbow silk fabrics.
Yeah, that was fun. I mean, I don't regret it. I think my mom loves it. And it's really interesting for me because that when people see it, it's a painting, it's almost like a framework, but how the corners treated and the patchwork is very resembled to Korean blanket. So it's a very small baby blanket almost.
Yeah.
But I really love the fact that all this work, sort of like a Korean contemporary Mondrian style, existed in the history of Korea in 19 Joseon period. People, the women, they don't call themselves artists. They were like they were like sort of like underrepresented, or not even like, in household, somebody has that kind of skill set, and the women always make work like that. And I wanted to reflect that everyday sort of like beauty that people, somewhere in somebody's family has grandmother or mother or sister or mother-in-law who have the skill set always making to blankets. And for me, my grandmother has that skill, and my grandma saves every single piece of like things that she has, and she always has a lot of stuff. And my mom used to yell at her like, when are you gonna throw all that away? You have like, oh, you're hoarding everything. And then she was so happy to give me a lot of stuff, like, oh, now Jiha's using that to make her artwork, how proud. And my mom finally realized, I'm never gonna wear this dress again. I think if you want to use it that way, you are absolutely should do it, because you are giving a birth to a brand new artwork using the wedding dress. And the color scheme has that sort of like Korean wedding ceremony, that atmosphere, like I often talk about, this is like this bright light green and red. In America, it's like the strawberry shortcake color. Or if you use a little bit darker green, it's Christmas color, but it has a completely different take on in Korean culture. So I really love to have that kind of language, goes beyond one culture, but it could go a lot more, out and have a different interpretation.
Yeah, definitely. And when we were kind of working on it in the studio, like we could kind of feel that. So Andrea Landau also, I kind of remember being like, you cut it. I didn't want to be the one to actually make that first cut. And she's so masterful with sewing and very skilled at this kind of work. So I remember being very nervous to actually be the one to cut the wedding dress. But we definitely, there was like that feeling of respect and admiration and gratitude for your mom for kind of contributing to this extra layer of the work. And it's just beautiful. I mean, there's so many details that you can kind of get lost in when you look at these pieces. They're really textured. And then even here you can see there was like a batting on it, and then there's like these green marks to help like keep the layers in place so that they didn't shift around. Organza loves to shift and move around. It's a very wild fabric, so we kept having to find ways to keep it exactly where we want it. This is the other security blanket that we made. Definitely had like a hot pink, really vibrant, playful vibe. And I love even like these peonies were in the background, right? And then the organza on top. So there was a lot of push and pull, right? The blue peonies embroidered on top.
Yeah, I remember having a problem like painting on organza. When I paint with acrylic, it kind of like, create this like ripples and
like a pucker.
Yeah, but then hanji paper does that too. And then it's a nature of it. I mean, people so used to look at oil on canvas. It's like if you have to stretch perfectly, and but on the contrary, you look at a lot of natural stuff, and Asian traditional painting. There's a natural crease that paper provides, and maker's hands still there. It's part of that process and part of the art object. So. The more I look at it, it doesn't bother me anymore. And my work is definitely basically all on papers, and they all have the tendency to do that. And, just like when people get a little older, they have crinkles or, not everything is flat and plain and perfect. I really like the way sort of the pieces kind of resemble to natural process and being more organic. And I now actually like it more that way. So it doesn't really bother me so much anymore. And my work is so abstracted, but I think that this also, I'll probably look at the Scarlet rocks, this like crazy rock formation. It's appreciated in Asian culture, and also waterfalls and wind and anything that nature provides that people cannot man-made. And so I always look at those things to juxtapose something, new, like something old, something new, always coexist, east and west, and organic mark making versus like geometry. And there's kind of like a sort of like duality in art form that I really like to have it as an aesthetic that talks about the story. Yeah, so I don't know I will ever work with organza again in the future, but that was really great experience. And I remember having all this like a troubleshoot you were telling me about. The framing has to be also perfectly gapped because like, you know, if we want to have this layer by layer, we need to put a little bit of distance, like, you know, that the frame has to hold it around the edges and all types of things, right? So I think about it, like, wow, that was quite difficult challenge, you know, piece.
It really was, but I think that, you know, we were kind of learning to work with this material, and the silk organza is so beautiful. It's one of those things where, a lot like the hanji paper, like it's really fragile, but it's also incredibly durable. So, I mean, we were like really working it, like stitching into it, painting on it, printing on it, stretching it, like manipulating it. And so I think we learned a lot as we were going, right? Like making things, responding to it, and figuring out, you know, what was going to actually look best. So here's the Springfield #1 in this really gorgeous frame, again with that 1/4 inch spacing, and some of these really, you know, beautiful details of the work. You know, and even just again that like screen printing, printmaker component of thinking about how when you put, you know, the yellow on top of the green, you know, you're going to get like that color change. So, you know, playing with even just the way these different layers interacted with each other. So beautiful.
Just jumping off of sort of the points that both of you just made, Jiha, I'm wondering if there are any elements of your time with the workshop and in the studio of experimentation or working with a different process that you took on into your artistic practice, and maybe something that we've seen in the 2 works that were featured in the exhibition that Lauren curated at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and the exhibition State of Art 2020.
Yeah, so I think that mainly my theme stays the same. Sometimes the color takes a little bit of bigger role. Sometimes the form takes a little bit of bigger role. Sometimes the text I incorporate has a like a bigger role. It depends on the work, but I've been working this way for a long time and has never really, I mean, this was my main interest, and culturally diverse, talking about how I live in America as Asian American. That was part of big question that I have throughout all my work. So here, like I'm talking about abstraction, and also the Springfield as a sort of like a suburban popular name for, you know, the town in America. You know, that still goes on. And for Crystal Bridge Museum exhibition, I started the project, painting project called the Yellow Wave, and sort of talking about Asian community at large. This was before Asian hate crime had happened, but it really struck me really hard, and I was really devastated because it happened the town that I live in, Atlanta, Georgia. And then I just realized in my studio, and how can I reflect that to my work? And I always like reflect what's going on outside to my work. Some ways it's very important for me. And so Lauren came to my studio and then look at everything, and she likes the painting the best, which I felt really awesome for it, because around that time my ceramic was getting a lot of, you know, attention. But at heart, I'm a painter, and I mean, I'm like, at the end of the day, I want to be a good artist. Like artists can do everything, right? But I start out as a painter. So I was really excited that Lauren recognized my true value. So that's how I thought, because on the ceramic surfaces, I paint. And it's on a different surfaces with more complicated form, and other iconography come out as a form, but the color and brush stroke sort of represent Asian American in this country. And as a maximalist aesthetic artist, and it was kind of harder not to use everything. But starting point from this painting, I sort of put color yellow as a main focus, and I've been continuously developing my series that way. And I am expecting to have a solo show next month, and then my show title called The Stranger Yellow, and a lot of objects and painting mainly have yellow. For me, it's the symbolizes like Asian community, but at the same time, everybody somehow share yellow in some way. Like, you know, Korean people see, you know, Western beauty, especially like, you know, Hollywood stars, they have blonde hair or something that like Asians don't have. But now when we talk about younger generations, they dye their hair not only blonde, green and purple and pink, they're not born with. So identity is something shifting and changing, and now you can add your own voice to it. So in many cases, my work sort of delivers that. And this painting just behind me, it's really large painting that I sort of try not to include so many colors, but use the color, all types of different shade of yellow to talk about a big energetic movement that can be scary, that can be beautiful, that can be sort of resembling weather patterns, because weather is something that human cannot control. And I continuously looking at the nature and also making a point against the human man-made things, and sort of utilizing those things to talk about my story. But here I use hanji paper too, hanji paper mounted on canvas surface. So when you look at it, oh, it's a Western format, it's a canvas, but how she get all that details, it's because paper's in between. There's like the paper observances very different, and water-based media is also very different than oil on canvas, which is a very Western driven perspective. And in Asia, we don't really distinguish painting and drawing so much. Just because we use water-based media doesn't mean it's only drawing, it's painting and drawing. And how do we see different perspective? And I wanted to offer that using my large work on canvas. So this is where I am, and I'm gonna continuously doing this and then explore other things. One other thing, so I use acrylic instead of oil, and acrylic for me is very America. The plastic, it's so much problem now, right? When we think about environment, everything we have to stop using plastic stuff. But here, like, for me, it's so much problematic material, but at the same time, it gets along so well with paper. And it definitely feels different from oil on canvas. And plastic, acrylic, and oil, paper, Korean mulberry paper, they're very harmonized and beautiful. And I wanted to showcase, using those material to be very contemporary. So these two paintings that you're showing right now is the most recent work. And those work that I showed at Crystal Bridge Museum that Lauren curated too.
Yeah, and I remember, Jiha, the first time I came to your studio, and it was a few years before even State of the Art. I was doing studio visits in Atlanta, where finally my family lives in Atlanta, like my mom and my sister and her kids, but I've never lived there. They moved when I was in college. So I really appreciated like going and getting to know artists. And Jiha, her studio is in her home and she's so welcoming, but walking down to where her studio is the first time, it's like this amazing experience, because you see the paintings, you see the artwork, and that's what the studio feels like. All the various materials, all various colors, everything is there. And, I think about, it was stuck with me. So when we were starting to think about the artists that we wanted to do visits with for State of the Art 2020, an exhibition that looks at artists working all across the country and trying not to focus too much on the coast, but really focusing everywhere in between. and really thinking about, okay, well, how are artists living and working, and what are they doing? What are they thinking about? And I think our studio visit was probably around 2018, 2019. And the exhibition opened in 2020. So an interesting moment for that, but really, going and seeing the work that you had continued to do, and obviously loving your ceramic work, but really being drawn to these paintings, right? And really being drawn to the ideas that you were putting into them and putting out into the world. And I think for me, I love collage in general, like as just a concept, this idea that I think, the idea of maximalism, right? As we're talking about, like, what are the different references, obviously, that you're bringing in, but the different ways in which you're bringing in materials and using the Hanji paper and all these references. And it's been amazing to see you and Jen talk about the Fabric Workshop Museum project, because literally it's like, I'm like learning about it and seeing that process. And I can very much see how it, played itself out and continues to be in your work. And just even the like very little references and the stickers and the nail decals and all of these elements that are in the work that at first glance you may not see them. And that's another thing that I love about your work, this idea that you actually really need to spend time with it. When the exhibition opened at Crystal Bridges and was opened and then closed, but then reopened again, it was nice to go into the galleries and actually see people looking at the work and spending time with it and being able to say, oh, okay, what is this? What am I looking at? And really being excited by pulling out various colors and references and things that I think just had a really great connection. And that's another thing that I feel is very prevalent in your work, right? Like they're the personal stories that you're bringing in, the materials like your mom's wedding dress, but also the larger references and the larger ways in which you're blending various cultures and ideas. I mean, this work especially, it's like you could spend hours looking at it and still not see everything, which I love, because I think that's one of the great points of art, right? We should spend time with it. We should be able to also all offer our own thoughts and perspectives and really be able to connect with what the artist is getting at. And I think that was really exciting to think about having you in the exhibition, particularly at a museum that is an American art museum, but very much, what does that mean? What does American art mean? Who's an American artist, and how can we push these conversations? And I think you and your work do that very well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really exciting to think about the fact that what your project was in 2010, and these works that you've just made now, we're almost in 2022. So really, it feels like a nice progression. And again, to see some of the like commonalities and the ways in which you're, as you say, still making work around the same topic and ideas, but you're pushing it and really moving it forward, which is really exciting to see.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I mean, I feel like now is a little more like opportunity for people to sort of accept and then look at my work in depth. I feel like it's like time, and I feel like it's really been great for people to take this seriously. And I always say that, like, my work is almost like serious joke in some way. But the way I deal with the work is very sincere manner, but doesn't have to be always too lecturish. I don't want my work to be too didactic, but has all the pleasures and fun. But wait a minute, what have I actually seen? And they really rethink about the context. That's kind of my goal. And here, this painting is called Mujige Yolo. Mujige is rainbow, and rainbow is one of the color pattern that I often use. And in Korean culture, it references certain things and longevity and like celebration of like parenthood or weddings, things like that. But in this country and different culture, it has a different meaning to it. And YOLO, it's a slang. It's kind of old slang, but it was very popular when we had Obama as a president. And I see this expression YOLO all the time in social media. but then it went to Korea, and then several years later, this slang YOLO, you only live once and do what you really want to do at the moment, it became a huge phenomenon, and people were quitting a job and they pursue what they wanted to do. And there's like a different sort of a take on. So I really thought that me reflecting the world the way I experience and then bring it back to my studio and then make art is very important. So I continuously doing that. But again, I really want to have so much fun in my studio too. You know, it sounds a little bit cliche, but I can't give up making a beautiful imagery. Like I want to make something moving, something really exciting to see. So I'm really, I guess, attached to that. So like using a color combination or certain shapes or texture, and those like a visual element become very important for my work.
Lauren, part of what I was reading about State of the Art 2020 was the sentiment that really stuck out with me was that location has stories. And when thinking about Jiha's, it feels really innate when you look at her work because it involves about a lot of her different identities and backgrounds. And I was wondering, since Jiha's been in Atlanta for a number of years now, and the Crystal Bridges Museum at the time you were based in the South, I was wondering what her work that was featured in that exhibit revealed about the Southern art scene.
Yeah, you know, it's been really interesting because, like I said, my family lives in Atlanta, so I started to get to know artists in Atlanta. I lived in Bentonville, Arkansas. I currently live in Durham, North Carolina. And I was born in Tennessee. So the South is very much something that I think a lot about. And what strikes me about the artists in Atlanta is really the fact that they have such a really amazing artistic community. You know, it was one of those things like when you go to artists' studios and you're sort of there doing studio visits, there's a lot of questions like, oh, who else are you seeing? Or, oh, you should go see this person. And there was such a generosity in everyone's spirit and support in that. And I think that speaks to, in a way, also how work can be supported, right? Because you have artists living and working everywhere in this country, everywhere in the world. But if there's not a community supporting them, the work can just be a little bit harder, right? Because if there aren't people for them to talk to, if there aren't people to like bounce ideas off of, or people to like see, and you know, not to mention galleries and collectors and museums, all of that really speaks to an arts ecosystem. But for me, I think a lot about, well, what artists, who can they talk to? Are there other artists that they can talk to? Are there other people they can have a conversation with? And I think obviously because of the great like arts institutions and universities that are in Georgia and that have really great programs, that speaks to like, you know, artists who teach that continue to be there, but then you also have artists who really make their home and work there. So it's been really exciting to see and to continue to go back and to have these conversations advance and get to know artists and their work in that regard. But yeah, sense of place was one of the themes for State of the Art 2020, and we very much let the artists, all the studio visits, even artists that didn't make it into the exhibition, those influenced what the themes were. So it was sense of place, mapping, world building, and temporality, and just the ways in which all of these, you know, at that 2018 to 2019 moment when we were doing these studio visits, that felt really very present, and I think continue to feel present in a lot of different ways, right? Sense of place, I think all of us experience that deeply. And continue to, and in different ways. So I think it's been exciting to sort of see and think about the exhibition. And also parts of it will be traveling, which is really exciting to think about it having different lives. And we're also able to add some works to the Crystal Bridges collection, including one of Jiha's works, which is really fabulous to think about.
Awesome.
This theme of location really stuck with me. It had me thinking, and I was wondering that, I mean, I know, Lauren, you've had like such an incredible, impressive background working as the curator of contemporary art and director of arts initiatives at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art and the Momentary, associate curator at the Studio Museum in Harlem, and now serving as the senior curator of contemporary art at the National Museum of Art. And I was actually wondering for you, how does location inform your curatorial practice and process?
Yeah, for me, it relates to getting to know the different communities that exist. So, maybe my curatorial work or the way I do it doesn't change from institution to institution, but it really then becomes about, okay, well, what are the differences in audience? Like, who is the main audience? Who are the audiences we're trying to get? Who comes here all the time? Who never comes here? And I think that's different based on where you are and getting to know that. And then also this idea of, well, who is the artist community? What do they think of the institution? What are ways in which you can connect with them? Because it feels so core to how I think about the work, being a contemporary curator and having had the opportunity to work with really great artists and how that informs my practice. So for me, location is involved in that because there are different artists everywhere and different audiences. So really getting to know who is in each place to really understand how you talk about the work and what projects you may do and different things like that.
Thank you. And then Jiha, I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's been over 10 years since you left your residency at the Fabric Workshop and Museum. And I know while you were here, you explored themes of identity, place, and home through a variety of materials, such as hanji paper that you mentioned, silk, your mother's wedding dress, and embroidery, and works such as Springfield 2, Cheshire Creek that we saw earlier. And then you continue to utilize those different materials as a way to express those different personal cultural themes in the work that was exhibited at State of the Art 2020 at the Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art. And I know recently you've shifted a little bit to ceramics. I was wondering how that shift was and how you were able to capture those themes using just one material when previously you were so used to using a variety of materials as a form of expression.
Well, my painting practice is still going on, and I am doing ceramic work now too. So, and I have that practice going on, and I also collaborate with print press, and then I make prints as well. So I think it's just like my creative juice. I think that like every time if I need to choose a specific material or genre for specific project, I don't want to be afraid to do so, and I'll find someone who could help if I needed to. But it's been really interesting journey to do ceramic work because it really had taught me so much. I was in a community ceramic studio for several years, and then I realized going back and forth was really harder. So I needed to save my time so that I can take care of family, I can do teaching job, I can do my studio practice. So I had created my ceramic studio at home basement. So I do actually everything all at home, just kind of doing different things. But it's been really great learning experience. Ceramic has a huge history of between Eastern and Western and beyond. So it really gave me opportunity to explore with the form and the texture and with the glaze, underglaze, different techniques. But most important thing is the image making. That image making exists in 2D or 3D. It's the same image going different genre. So for me, that's really exciting. And for some people, painting can be a little bit like, like cold, beautiful painting and a white wall, like nobody's allowed to touch. And ceramics so friendly, and there are objects, and everybody has little knickknack or teapots in their house, and their uncles and parents like collecting something, and it can be really good souvenir. People bring stuff from traveling places. And I really want to borrow that friendliness of object wood, and ceramic has been really great. People look at it unguarded, looking their attitude is somewhat different from looking at the painting. So I learned that experience working on the ceramic, and I just want people to realize we are looking at the same images, one in 2D, like the same image goes on the 3D. one is on the paper, the other is on the earthenware or porcelain surfaces. But my act of painting and drawing, collaging things are same. So for me, it's really exciting that I could have all this different area that I could explore with. God knows who's gonna come up next. I mean, I would love to explore with different material, like opportunity that I had with Fabric Workshop. I work with Jan to create this beautiful blankets and other material-based pieces. But in the future, I don't know, like, I would like to explore more and learn about that material that can be a better communicator for my content.
Thank you. I feel like that really just goes beautifully to what you spoke earlier about sort of change and process. And so it makes seeing your work and all your new work just more and more exciting, because I feel like it's always like a little bit different, which is really nice to see. Jen, I was wondering, as someone who came to FWM, as you spoke, with extensive background in printmaking, I was wondering how your skills connected to Jiha's project, and if you felt that it pushed your skills as an artist and a printmaker.
Oh, absolutely. As I started to kind of allude to as we were kind of looking at some of the samples and the work in progress, neither of us had ever done anything quite like this before, right? So learning how to work with this new material, thinking about like the opacity, the right kind of inks, registration on something that does not want to be registered at all. It definitely pushed my own technical skill to be able to carry something like this out, for sure. And even embroidery, I mean, I did a lot of the embroidery as well. And that's something that I really never had done before. So doing samplers and learning different kinds of types of embroidery, right? Just like as we go. It was pretty remarkable.
Thank you. I think unfortunately we only have time for one more question, but I want to ask this to all of you guys. Jiha as an artist, and Jen as now the executive director of Second State Press, and Lauren now, as I spoke, as the senior curator of contemporary art at the National Museum of Art. I was wondering, what is the best takeaway you hope you have people walk away with after every exhibition?
Well,
Wow,
that's a hard
really
question.
amazing
Sorry,
question.
ending with a very difficult question.
I think for me, I really want people to come away feeling, I know it sounds silly, but feeling something, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that I want everyone to have to love every single exhibition or every single artwork that they've seen, but even if they hate it and they can sort of articulate why or have a feeling, or it gets them talking and they tell someone else about it, I think that's what I really love, right? This idea that it can provoke a conversation, it can provoke a feeling, it can provoke a continued idea. And that's really what I hope people come away with and think about after exhibitions.
I think
Well said.
Yeah, very well said. I think kind of connecting to that, just that sense of connection, or even just understanding, the people behind the work, and that the work is made by hand and made by, years of talent and experience. And in the case of Jiha's work, of course, this is all Jiha's vision, but there were probably 30 different hands on some of those individual pieces, all the way from screen printers to embroiderers to even the framers who had to do some really fancy techniques. So yeah, just that sense of connection, and hopefully maybe a little bit of awe and wonder. I mean, that's always really nice too.
Well, I hope that people come and see the work again. This technology is being really like important thing in this world. I feel like more of handmade or stuff become like pushed over. And I feel that people just look at the images one more time and just kind of have opportunity to think about or reconnect with the work based on their experience would be really nice. But to be honest, as an artist, I always have to kick all the voices out of my head when I make work and I purely need to be myself. So I try not to think about audience because I don't want my work to become pretentious. So it's a really harder question. Like, communication is very hard, but when I'm making the work, I'm really like into myself, my own world. But once it's go out of studio and start making a connection, I sort of like cannot handle it anymore. But in my studio, I want to reflect what's going on outside and the time that I live in, like 2021, and that time, what I was thinking, what was important in my head, how do I connect with the world, and I definitely want to reflect that to my work.
I think you definitely succeed in that. I just want to thank you all so much for being in conversation together for our 4th episode of Unpacking Our Stories. I wish we had more time to keep our conversation going, but it's been so wonderful and thought-provoking to hear you, Jen, talk about your experience working with Jiha, and Jiha, your time with the Fabric Workshop and working with Lauren, and Lauren, also just hearing you speak as you were curating the exhibition at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art for State of the Art 2020. You guys are all really wonderful, and this has been such a lovely experience.